We are not thanking you enough.
બધાને
આટલી બધી એનર્જી કાઢવાની
છે
કારણ કે થેન્ક યુ ઇઝ નોટ ઇનફ પણ
ના પણ આટલી બધી એનર્જી લઈને કરવાનું એટલે we really appreciate it.
અને રાજનભાઈ મને તો અમેઝિંગ લાગે છે કે your thought process understanding of all this different is so clear. હજી તમે આટલું લેક્ચર આપ્યું તો અમે કન્ફ્યુઝ થઈ જઈએ છીએ સાચું.
I think he likes it. He likes it.
ના પણ
Of course,
અસ્મિતા હજી એમણે નથી કીધું કે એને કઈ કેન્ડી ચાખી છે ને એને કઈ ભાવી છે.
તમને ગુરુ દક્ષિણા 1 ડિસેમ્બર માં વાઇન ની બોટલ આપું છું.
દિનેશ, I'm saying the same thing.
બધા શિષ્યો એકબીજાને ભણાવે છે. બધા શિષ્યો એકબીજાને ભણાવે છે.
રાજનભાઈ ક્યાં વાઇન પીએ છે?
એટલે તો આપે છે.
બટાકાનું રાજનભાઈ ને પેલું બટાકાનું તળેલું શાક ભાવે છે તે હું બનાવીને ખવડાવી.
વેરી ગુડ.
અમને પણ ભાવે છે.
રાજન ઇઝ હેપી વિથ એવરીથિંગ.
એટલે તો ગુરુ જે પણ મળે એનાથી સંતોષ માનવો એવું છે.
ના ના તો રીંગણાનું શાક આપવો જોઈએ, ખબર પડી જશે.
નહીં ખાવું ગયા એમ કે છે બસ.
That's fine. આપણે પ્રતાપ અને અનિલભાઈ આપણે બુધવારે નથી ક્લાસ?
ક્લાસ નથી.
પછીના વીકમાં છે?
પછીના વીકમાં છે.
અચ્છા, ઓકે.
ઓ પછીના વીકમાં બધું ગડબડ થશે જે છોકરીઓ તો આવી જશે.
ઓકે, that's fine. We'll work it out.
આપણું પછીના વીકનું મંડે નું કદાચ માની વાળીએ તો સારું
એવું કરીએ. આપણે આપણું મંડે નું ના કરીએ અને પછી ન્યુ યર પછી કરીએ.
હા, રાઈટ.
Sounds good. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that will be fine.
ઓકે.
અનિલભાઈ તો પ્રાર્થના કરીએ આપણે.
ચાલો. યસ. વસુદેવ સુતમ દેવમ સચાણૂરમર્દનમ દેવકી પરમાનંદમ કૃષ્ણમ વંદે જગદ્ગુરુમ.
ઓકે, સો અને આપણે બુદ્ધિઝમ ને શરૂ કર્યું હતું એટલે બેઝિકલી વી ટોક્ડ અબાઉટ કે 4 noble truth, પછી 8 pathways, and we talked about all those things earlier. Do you want me to go over again or it's okay?
If you
No,
go,
I remember.
if you go
It's okay.
fast.
Okay.
પણ just summarize in a couple of sentences.
Okay. આપણે તો અશોકભાઈ,
હા,
can you go back in the slide and we can just at least quickly go over those slides? કે મારું maybe my computer નથી કાઢેલું બીજું. I can look in my phone. Hold on for a second.
નહીં આ ગયા છે.
Okay. So
બસ. Yes.
okay, so let's go to the next slide. Yeah.
this is the first one.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Yeah.
Second one.
Second, okay, got it.
Okay, so there are 5 skandhas basically. Okay, Buddhist idea is that consciousness is a product of 5 skandhas. It's a flickering phenomenon. There is no permanent sense of consciousness. It's a product of the brain activity. Call it that way. So there are 5 skandhas. What are those? Form, what we perceive with the eyes. Sensation, what we perceive with the eyes or ears or whatever we take in from outside. And what we cognize, like how does mind look at that? Whatever the information comes from outside, your eyes see it, mind analyzes it, and then forms a picture in your mind. Same thing for sound, same thing for touch and taste and everything. And that is the product, that is the consciousness. So the consciousness is a product of sort of called interaction between all those things, from outside to the eyes or ears to the mind, and the product is a consciousness. That is the idea. So there is no such thing as a permanent consciousness that Vedanta teaches. That is the idea. Most of the religions will teach that there is a conscious entity, either Krishna or Father in heaven or whatever, who produces this matter and produces this world. Advaita Vedanta will say there is a conscious phenomenon, Nirgun Brahman, which produces this reflection in the mind. So there is like whatever you see in the mind is not actually true consciousness, but it's a reflection of in the mirror of the true consciousness. So Buddhism doesn't go beyond the mind. Okay, so that's the next step. Okay, let's go. Okay, so I think this is the same explanation basically. Form is the bottom, then you experience, what is the blue thing? I can
Contact.
Oh, contact, yeah. Okay, so then sensation, perception, impulse, and the consciousness. So it's basically explaining the same thing over again. Let's go to the next one. So basically it's the same thing in a different way. Let's go. Okay, so what are the noble truth? Human life is a suffering. Now he is using word dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but that is not necessarily correct translation. Dukkha is a state of, call it unsatisfactory condition, not necessarily suffering. So it's not like you are suffering, but you are never satisfied. That is what dukkha is. The cause of suffering, dukkha is greed, because we want something from outside that we want to keep on getting from outside. And there is an end to suffering. And the way to end suffering is to follow the middle path. And we'll talk about that, what path. So that's the next step. Okay, let's go. So this is an explanation of dukkha. It is a mental pain or mental pain that sort of makes you wanting more and more because you are never ever satisfied. So that is similar to what Vedanta will teach also. Is the reason we are unhappy is because we feel inadequate or incomplete. And we think if we get something X, Y, Z, we'll become complete. But the problem with the whole thing is that at one point you want a 3-bedroom house. Once you are satisfied, once you reach 3.3 bedroom house, you want 5-bedroom house. When you are, so your demand or expectation or desire keeps on increasing constantly. You never feel like this is it and I'm satisfied. You'll always feel like if I have a car, I want a Lexus. I have a Lexus or a Mercedes, go on, that kind of thing. So your demand or expectation keeps on increasing as soon as you get whatever you were looking for. That is the idea. So there is a desire that makes you unhappy all the time, or at least makes you dissatisfied and wanting more and more. The idea of Vedanta is that once you realize that you are complete and self, anything that comes from outside is just the extraneous stuff. It doesn't make you any more happy. You just leave it with whatever you have, as long as you feel satisfied within your own mind. That is the idea of dukkha and how dukkha becomes sukha. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, so 3 universal truths. The life is impermanent and always changing. So there is a given thing. Because nothing is permanent, life based on possessing thing or person doesn't ever make you happy. There is no, now this is the last part, is the one which is completely different from Vedanta. There is no eternal unchanging soul and self, as Vedanta will say. So that is what Buddha says, So Buddha's idea is there is no permanent entity called self. So that's a universal truth as far as Buddha is concerned. Let's go further.
1 second, Rajan
Yeah.
bhai, that last sentence you said, that means ke reincarnation or the soul going from one life to other life doesn't exist in Buddhism?
No, it does exist, but I'm with the next few slides, somewhere along the line is going to come to that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So how do you get nirvana or moksha for Hinduism, nirvana of Buddhism? Nirvana is used both ways. Hinduism is also using, Buddhism also using, But idea is basically right understanding, right values, right speech, right action, right word, effort, mindfulness, meditation. All those are the pathways. So we covered most of this before. So we'll go to the next one now. So Buddhist cosmology lies on 3 major important things, which are somewhat different compared to what you and I have learned so far. Okay. So one is shunyata, emptiness. Second is impermanence. And third is no atma, anatma. So no self. Let's talk each one. universe is empty of finite forms. The true nature of universe was unbroken oneness, and any image of concept of finite, separate or independent form was completely illusory. So what essentially is saying is that what we perceive as a finite thing is devoid of anything important. There is a shunyata within that. We perceive that to be important, but once you go inside that, what you find is nothingness. So just think about it. I mean, if I can use a scientific analogy, the Big Bang theory is something like there was nothing, and there was a Big Bang, and the world came to an existence. So the question was, can something come from nothing? If there is nothing, how can nothing produce something? That is the dilemma. And that's what you talked about, and we'll come to that, what carries forward. So that is one concept, is that world is implied to have no substance. What he means no substance is because everything is constantly changing. There is nothing underlying permanent. The argument something like this, if I can use analogy, if I am driving a car, how Vedanta will explain, if I am driving a car and put it on a 65, cruise control, I can manipulate the cruise control 65, 70, 75, but the speed concept is same. The car is moving at a speed, but the variability of the speed is changeable. So what Vedanta says is that the speed is the permanent aspect of moving car, and changing the speed at different times is the impermanent aspect. Or if you don't put in a cruise control and you just put the brake and accelerator up and down, your speed will keep on changing all the time. So that is the impermanent part, but the speed itself is still there, whether it's 35, 45, 55, 65, but the concept of speed is always there. The nature of the speed constantly changes. So am I making sense? So Buddha says is that since it's a constantly evolving phenomenon, constantly changing phenomenon, that's all there is. There is no such thing as a permanent entity underneath that. Shankaracharya will say, you cannot have an impermanent thing without comparison to permanent thing. If you are comparing something impermanent, compared to what? There must be constant something that you are comparing to. So that for him is the Atman or Brahman, whatever you want to call that. And that impermanent is just a variability within that permanent aspect. Buddha will not go further beyond the impermanence per se. That is the idea. So for him, everything ends at the level of mind. Nothing goes beyond the mind. For Shankara and for Vedanta, mind is a middle ground. It's a reflection of a permanent consciousness that is being visualized or experienced in the living being. That is the idea. Second concept is impermanence. We already talked most of it. Since everything is constantly moving, constantly changing, there is nothing to worry about what lies beyond that. So Buddha doesn't even want to answer the question about is there something beyond that impermanence. For him, that's all it is that what we are experiencing day in, day out is the impermanence of kshanikta. Kshanik, what is it? It's everything is kshanik.
Kshanbhangur, yeah.
Kshanbhangur, right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, Smita Ben.
કશું કહો છો?
ના એટલે ક્ષણિક એટલે short lived.
Right. Well, short lived means it just comes and goes.
ક્ષણભંગુર.
Kshanabhangur. It's like a flame that keeps on flickering.
Yeah, but that sunning also a little bit relative, right? For short
Yeah,
is
relative thing. Yeah, it's a relatively, but it's constantly moving. Another example will be something like this. When we are born, we are a baby, becomes a child, becomes a boy, becomes an adult, becomes a man, old man, and those kind of things. So what he is saying is that this is all there is. But what Shankaracharya says, there must be something underneath that knows that I was a child, I was an adolescent boy, I was an adult, I was an old man, blah, blah, blah. So what Shankaracharya in Vedanta says is that there must be something that knows all those things. And that is who I am. Am I making sense?
So that is something who I am.
So that something that knows and experiences all those changes is the one who I am. And Buddha will say is that what I am is an illusion. I am, there's no such thing as I am. The I am is a conglomeration of things that is constantly changing. So that I am is something that is impermanent per se. There is no permanent person, entity called I am or Atman. Yeah, go ahead. Anil Bhai.
Okay. Okay, yes. What you are saying is perfectly right. If I just want to say something, that permanency thing, if you look at it, that idea is also somewhat in Vedanta and our Hinduism, because what we call ego self is we take it as a permanent thing. So that there is this two aspect of it. That આપણે કહીએ ને કે આપણો ઈગો કાઢવો જોઈએ, ઈગો ન હોવો જોઈએ, ઈગો આપણે કરીએ છીએ, that is the impermanent self. And beyond, if you go beyond ego, then it would be the sort of some kind of a ground. So the difference you are explaining basically is that Vedanta would say you have to have a ground to measure something that is changing. You cannot have a changing series all the time and say that is it. Because changing with respect to what you have said, the speed examples and all these things. So I guess that is what probably, if it explains a little bit more, I don't know whether it confuses it. પણ આપણે જેને ઈગો સેન્સ કહીએ છીએ એ આપણામાંથી જવી જોઈએ. આપણે કહીએ ને કે આપણે ઈગો કાઢો. That is the impermanent thing. That is what we have to go beyond that. So for that we have to cross the mind. Vedanta would say you go beyond the mind and you will find something that is reflected in a mind, and that is creating all this kind of a thing. Something about Kshanikavad. So all this aggregates generate that sort of a thing, and it is that momentary thing. That idea was also somewhere in Vedanta. If you look at there is a Mandukya, this is going deep into it. Ila says, leave it here. So I'm going to leave it, but I give you some idea. There is a concept in Vedanta where you have a mashal. આપણે મશાલ ગોળ ફેરવીએ તો આપણને ચક્કર લાગે. So that is the idea of the ક્ષણિક thing. મશાલ એક વખત હોય છે અહીંયા, એક વખત અહીંયા, but it creates a circle. So Gaudapada had this kind of a theory. That theory is known as Ajatvad. So some of the Buddhist thought also came into Vedanta, and that is this Ajatvad. So that's probably too deep, but it's there.
That is the reason most of the devotional school accuse Shankaracharya is a crypto-Buddhist. Because Shankaracharya accepted some of this explanation from Buddhism and used it in a way to justify his permanent ground. So Vaishnava school will say Shankaracharya is actually a Buddhist, disguised as a Vedantist, or a Vedantist in the disguise of a Buddhist, or vice versa. So because they believe is that there is a God entity, an individual, a person, a man or a woman or whatever. When Shankaracharya accepted, see, remember I told you the history that when Shankaracharya came in the forefront, Buddhism was a dominant school. So he was trying to use their ideas and modulate in a way of the Vedanta. So he sort of call it, he stole some of the ideas of Buddhism and made it within the fold of Hinduism, or within the Vedantic fold. There is a historian called S. Mudgal, who wrote a history of how Buddhism and Vedanta evolved. And he says something like this: Shankaracharya embraced Buddhism, but it was a fatal embrace for Buddhism. So he essentially sort of call it, he sort of embraced in the sense that he kind of covered him, and his covering was so tight that the Buddhism died in India, and he accepted some of the principles and carried forward in the mold of Hinduism, in the Vedantic literature. So that is the idea. But he, and in a few slides, we'll talk about what is continued, and we'll come to that. So let me just go in according to the slide. So the idea of anatman, idea of impermanence, and idea of shunyata are the three key ingredients of Buddhism in general, which are somewhat different. Yeah, go ahead.
No, finish the sentence.
Which are different than what the Vedantic teaching is, more or less, call it that way.
Yeah, correct. But I still didn't get the no self part.
Yeah, we'll come to no, but basically call it that way. Vedanta, like what Anil Bhai said, Vedanta says that what you and I perceive I am, my personality, is the ego, is the mind. And the mind is a reflection of a consciousness that lies beyond. So mind is perceiving the consciousness of the Atman and thinking that I am this. I am Anil Bhai, or I am Rajni Bhai, or I am Rajan. You know. But
right.
That is an ego. It is not the true consciousness per se. It is a generation of this skandha within the mind, which is a reflection of the original I. So think about it. There is a small I and there is a large, big capital I. Capital I is the Atman and small I is the ego. But that small I thinks that I am the big I.
Big I, right. But that is in Vedanta. What is here?
Yeah, that is in the Vedanta. Buddhism will say there is no such thing as a big I per se. There is only one I, and that is ego.
Okay, got it. Now I understand. Thank you.
Ashok bhai, I cannot see you, so if you have anything to add or question, go forward, because I cannot see you. All right, let's move on. Next one.
Okay.
Okay, so there are three basic major schools of Buddhism. There are many subdivisions within Buddhism. આપણે હિન્દુમાં જેવું છે તેવું જ. પણ three major schools, first called Theravada. Theravada, Vajrayana and Mahayana. Theravada is also called Hinayana. Hin means low. Yana means movement. So lower movement. Mahayana means higher movement. So original teaching by Buddha is called Hinayana or Theravada. Okay, so everything that he said or was dictated or written by someone, what Buddha said was in Pali language. You know, so most of the literature of Theravada is in Pali, and primarily it was meant for monastic life. Okay, Buddhism in those days was primarily geared for sannyas, how Buddha became sannyasi. So his teaching was more or less in that same line in Pali language for sannyasi. And most important part, Theravada teaches how to liberate myself, or how do I get nirvana. So that was the original idea when Buddhism started. And it started eventually multiplying in different directions. And the next line was Mahayana. Mahayana came and said is that just yourself being liberated does no good to anybody else. You know, you are being selfish. You are being self-centered. If I am looking for nirvana and I do not help anyone else, what good does it do to the world? So Mahayana was a path that taught about not only that I must long for liberation, but I must ensure that once I feel liberated, that I go out in the community, I go out in the larger domain and teach everyone else how to be. So Mahayana will say something other way around. Says, Hinayana will say, Theravada will say, if you want to liberate yourself and you start thinking about liberating everybody else, what is going to happen to you is that you are going to be entangled in the sansar. So you are not going to be liberated yourself, and you are not going to be able to liberate anyone else either, because you yourself will be entangled. So Hinayana teaches liberation for yourself only. Don't worry about everybody else. Just concentrate on you, how to liberate yourself. Mahayana will teach larger good for the society, that liberation for myself is good, but liberation for the entire world or the community is even better. I'm coming to Vajrayana. Basically, those are the two major schools. You know, I have another. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Mahayana and Vijayana is the two major school right now.
Mahayana, Hinayana.
Hinayana.
It's
So
a
right now, which is for
Theravada is same as Hinayana.
okay, but right now for Buddhism, je loko Buddhism follow करे છે.
So there is a third school which is Tibetan Buddhism, which is Vajrayana. I'll come to that. So original school was called.
એનું શું
પૂછી
ના ના નામ પેલું આનું જ
Okay.
Original school was called Theravada, and a Theravada was eventually changed to by Mahayana guys as a Hinayana. Hin means no. So I forgot that. It's written there.
that was my question કે how do I
Theravada is same as a Hinayana. The nomenclature was devised by the Mahayana school, saying we are higher, you are lower. And Theravada will say, no, wait a second, that's not true. You know.
But the people who are following Buddhism right now, they follow the Mahayana.
I'm
right
coming
now.
to that. There is the next slide is talking about. All of them are being followed by different groups. આપણે કેવું વૈષ્ણવાઇટ સ્કૂલમાં કોઈ વલ્લભાચાર્યમાં હોય, કોઈ ચૈતન્ય મહાપ્રભુ, કોઈ રામાનુજાચાર્ય હોય, કોઈ શંકરાચાર્ય, એટલે all of them are there. It's not like one is over. I mean, this is like how the division started.
Oh, okay.
Understanding how the process of demarcation happened. So Mahayana school was developed in the later part, not when Buddha was alive, by his disciples. So his disciples enlarged the scope of Buddhism teaching, and most of it was written in Sanskrit, as I wrote down here. So it was monastic and also for common people.
Correct.
So what they did was Nivrutti part was taken as Nivrutti plus Pravrutti. So they enlarged the scope. Something, remember, there is a story of Mahavir. And I think you can use the same story for Buddhism too. You know, Mahavir's disciple is asking that I have been serving you for God knows 20 years or 30 years. When will I get the Kaivalya? You know, Kaivalya is a Jainism term. Same thing in yoga too. So Mahavir says, as soon as you let me go. So Mahavir says, as long as you are clinging to me, you are never going to get Kaivalya. So let me go. So basically what he is trying to say is that if you are attached to something, you will never get liberated. That is the idea.
that's the same as Buddha, right?
Same thing, same idea basically.
Same idea.
Idea is same.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
So
they were, Mahavir and Buddha almost same time.
they were contemporary.
Yeah.
Both of them are supposedly 400 to 500 BC.
Oh, I see.
So, but
So
they
in-
never met according to history. They
Right.
never came together.
Correct.
But even they are from the same part, right? Bihar and
In
They
a
both-
similar area, right.
here. So in Theravada, they are supposed to be like sannyasi. They'll give
But
up.
that is what they teach. આપણે ધારો કે આપણે સન્યાસી એટલે તમે જાઓ આપણે સ્વામિનારાયણમાં. So for the sannyasi, I mean, so they don't necessarily say કે ભાઈ બાકીના બધા લોકો સન્યાસી થઈ જાય. But those who adopt, they have to be sannyasi. Am I making sense? Their emphasis is sannyas. But it's not like everybody is sannyasi.
Understand.
Like that, Upanishads are also like that. Most of the Upanishads were written by rishis who were living in the jungle.
Jungle, right?
You know,
So same as Jainism, right?
same thing in Jainism too. Right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's not like the followers will be, but what they meant is that sannyasis were going into the world and getting entangled in the world and teaching everything. So they were not necessarily moving away from the
Moving.
world per se. So
I
that is the Mahayana part. So third one is called Vajrayana, which is the Tibetan Buddhism.
Huh?
Mute.
Tibet, Dalai Lama. The third part is called Vajrayana. It's similar to Buddhism of Dalai Lama, or is primarily similar to Tantra. Apni Hinduism main schools are what? Vaishnavite school and Shankarite school. Shankar Bhagwan ni. Shaivism. So Shaivism, Tantra is a major part. So because Tantra developed in the northeast corner of India, and Tibet is in that region, Tantra and Vajrayana have a lot of similarity. So, like RMK, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, was significantly influenced by Tantra, by Shiva and Shakti. Though he talked about Vedanta as well, but he also talked about Mother Kali.
Yeah.
Mother Kali is Tantra. Okay, so Tantra and Tibetan Buddhism have a lot of similarity, or at least closeness to each other. And Dalai Lama is a very astute fellow. He expanded the influence of Tibetan Buddhism all over the world because of his own personality. Now they have like mixture of different things. They don't necessarily have one per se. So let me read what it says. It was originally exclusive to Tibet, emphasized permanence of Buddha's teaching as symbolized by Vraj, thunderbolt. So essentially, you get enlightened as a thunderbolt. That's what he will say. It comes like quick. And they also talked about rituals and ceremonies similar to many of these religious ceremonies and tantra ceremonies, and employed most of the tantra techniques. And one of these days we are going to talk about Kashmir Saivism too. So we'll talk about those tantra stuff. But basically, idea is that three major schools, not necessarily they are exclusive per se, like Vaishnavite school are not exclusive to Shankarite school or Shaivite school or something like that. There is always going to be a admixture of different things. But these are the way to look at them. Within those schools, there are many sub-schools. But I'm not going in those details because there are some minor variations within those. So let's move on to the next slide.
A quick question.
Yeah.
જેને આપણે શૈવિઝમમાં જે શિવને પેલું જે કહીએ તંત્ર કરે, they are into like self-torturing, right? They kind of poke their tongue and a needle nakin બધું. Is that true? I don't know.
They wants to answer that question.
I would also say one more thing to add here. When you are talking about Tantra and Buddhism and Hinduism, Shaivism, there is also Jain Tantra. Tantra, is a huge, very expanded thing. Even in Vaishnavism, there is a sect in Bengal which is called Sahajiya. Rajan bhai, probably you know about the Sahajiya. Sahajiya,
I heard, but I don't know much about it.
But the tantras have two parts. One is a left-handed part, and other one is a right-handed part.
Right, yeah.
We generally do not talk about left-handed part.
Right.
Because this is the kind of tantrism which is the lower level of tantrism. But otherwise, tantra is a basically એની ડેફિનેશન શું છે કે કોઈ એક વસ્તુને લઈએ આપણે તણોત્રયથી ઇતિ તંત્ર એને આપણે ખેંચીએ ને એને એક્સપાન્ડ કરીએ, that is tatra. So you are taking some basic stuff and expanding it into something more. That is what tantra is.
So maybe that's like a
now talking about that Shaivism, there was a sect, Shaivism has a big, huge history. It goes back even before the Vedanta. લોકો કહે છે કે 5000 વર્ષ પહેલા પણ Shaivism હતું. So yes, you are right. There were some Shaivite schools which were basically I gave you some examples. This is a talk outside of these things. So we are not going to really, just to mention that as you ask the question, કે અમુક લોકો ગાંડાની જેમ ફરતા હોય ગામની અંદર. So why would they do something like that? Because they want to self-inflict themselves. ક્રિશ્ચિયાનિટીમાં પણ અને મુસ્લિમોમાં પણ આપણે જોઈએ છે કે મોહરમમાં પેલા મારતા હોય કોઈને. Some people, they thought at those days that by torturing themselves, by taking others' pain, others' thing, they would probably go out. So there is a sect like that, but that sect was gone long. So Shaivism, mantra marga and ati marga. Ati margi people were the one you describing, those kind of people. But since then, mantra marg came. So tantra and mantra go together. So people became mantra margi. So one of these days, we probably will look at the history of Shaivism and see where this break occurred. Okay.
Left sided Vama Panth. And left side was like, તમે સંઘર્ષ મૂવી જોયું હતું? સંઘર્ષ દિલીપ કુમાર ને વૈજયંતી માલાનું?
ના, હા, મેં નથી જોયું.
એમાં જે છે ને વાર્તા, it's somewhat similar to